Welcome to part 2 of the module Syllogisms. Hope you all remember the 4 different types of statements that we learned in the previous video. Now have a look at this question. All dogs are cats and all cats are kittens. The conclusion of this syllogism is all dogs are kittens. Now the rule of thumb for solving syllogisms is that the middle term will not be the part of the primary conclusion. Further in this video, we shall discuss the 10 golden rules that is going to help us solve syllogisms easily. Most of the rules are basic and are interconnected. Hence, once you start practicing the questions, you will be gradually internalizing the rules and it is going to become a habit. So let's start. Rule number 1 says that every deduction should contain 3 and only 3 terms. Have a look at the example. Here the major premise is all men are mortal and the minor premise is Socrates is a man. So what is the conclusion? Obviously that Socrates is mortal. Now what will happen if we have more than 3 terms? For example, all animals are mortal and Socrates is a man. Then will you be able to draw out any conclusion out of it? No. So it's simple logic. Rule 2 says that the middle term should be distributed at least once in the premises, otherwise no conclusion can be drawn. The question is, all cats are sweet and some sweet are chocolates. What will happen otherwise? Well, this will happen. You won't be able to draw connection between terms. So for this statement, there is no primary conclusion. Rule 3 is that if the middle term is distributed twice, then the conclusion cannot be universal. An example is all dogs are cats and all dogs are donkeys. Here, the primary conclusion will be some cats are donkeys. Let's understand it with a Venn diagram. Now you might ask, why can't we draw the image in a different way so that there is more overlap? We are not doing so because in Venn diagram, there is a rule called the rule of least possible overlap, which means that when you draw a Venn diagram, you will draw it with the minimum number of overlaps. Rule 4 states that if both premises are universal, the conclusion will be universal. Example, all pigs are dogs and all dogs are cats. The primary conclusion for this syllogism is all pigs are cats. Through this question, we are going to learn the other possible conclusions of a syllogism. For this question, the second conclusion is the converse of the first conclusion, which is some cats are pigs. And the third and the fourth conclusions are the converse of the statements itself, which are some dogs are pigs and some cats are dogs. So now you know that any two-statement syllogism can have 4 conclusions. The first one is a primary conclusion to which the 10 rules are applicable, and the rest 3 are the converse statements of the primary conclusion and the statements. Rule 5 states that if both premises are affirmative, then the conclusion will be affirmative. Have a look at the example. All girls are beautiful, all beautiful are honest. The primary conclusion is all girls are honest. Rule 6 says that if both the premises are negative, then no conclusion can be drawn. Example, no flower is mango, no mango is cherry. This syllogism doesn't have a primary conclusion and only has the converse of the statements as the conclusions. So the conclusions are no mango is flower and no cherry is mango. According to Rule 7, if both the premises are particular, then no conclusion can be drawn. Example, some books are pens and some pens are erasers. Here, we do not have a primary conclusion and we only have the converse of the statements as a conclusion, which are some pens are books and some erasers are pens. You can relate this rule to some of the rules that we previously discussed, such as the second rule that states that the middle term has to be distributed at least once in the statements to draw the primary conclusion. According to rule number 8, if one premise is negative, then the conclusion must be negative. Example, no man is bad and all devil is bad. The primary conclusion is no man is devil. Now you can remember this rule by associating it with this simple rule in mathematics, which is a positive integer multiplied by a negative integer is equal to a negative integer. Rule 9 states that if one premise is particular, then the conclusion must be particular. Example, all gardens are white, some gardens are flowers. The primary conclusion is some white are flowers. Now what will happen otherwise? Well, then a term that is not distributed in the premise will get distributed in the conclusion. And that brings us to the 10th and the final rule. That is, no term can be distributed in the conclusion if it is not distributed in the premises. Example, all laptops are computers and all computers are machines. The primary conclusion is all laptops are machines. Now this cannot be all machines are laptops. You can cross-verify this rule with any of the previously discussed rules and it will make absolute sense. However, please do remember that these rules are meant to be applied for the primary conclusions of any syllogism and not to the converse statements. Now, if you are thinking that's too many rules to memorize, trust me, it's not the case. Let's have a quick recapitulation. Rule 1. Every deduction should contain 3 and only 3 terms. I hope you are clear about this by now and don't have to remember it as such. Rule 2. The middle term should be distributed at least once in the premises, otherwise no conclusion can be drawn. Always keep this habit of putting a tick or a cross mark above the statements. That saves a ton of time. Rule 3. If the middle term is distributed twice, then the conclusion cannot be universal. This you will automatically understand. Otherwise, a term that is not distributed in the premise will get distributed in the conclusion. Rule 4. If both premises are universal, the conclusion will be universal, which means all plus all is equal to all. Rule 5. If both premises are affirmative, then the conclusion will be affirmative, which means positive plus positive is equal to negative. Rule 6. If both the premises are negative, then no conclusion can be drawn. That is, no means no conclusion. Rule 7. If both the premises are particular, then no conclusion can be drawn, which again is very similar to rule number 6. This means sum is equal to no conclusion. Rule 8. If one premise is negative, then the conclusion must be negative. Now this can be remembered by connecting it to the mathematical rule. Rule 9. If one premise is particular, then the conclusion must be particular. This also can be connected to the 8th rule and remembered. Rule 10. No term can be distributed in the conclusion if it is not distributed in the premises. I think this we already know by now. With that, we have come to an end of this video. Now try solving the syllogism questions using these rules, and once you internalize the rules, with practice, you are going to save a lot of time in solving these questions. Best wishes!